or soon. I will be your facilitator for tonight. And tonight we will learn a lot more about the transportation plan, specifically for the Roxbury neighborhood. The goal of this meeting is to gather feedback and information about the current plan to ensure and minimize impacts on the community that is surrounding Franklin Park and will be impacted by White Stadium. We're joined here today specifically by a lot of the city staff members that made tonight possible, from the mayor's office, the Boston Transportation Department, and importantly, Boston Unity's soccer partners as well. And we also have our some transportation consultants from Brian from Howard Hudson as well. So want to make sure they're welcomed, and people will be speaking a lot later on the presentation tonight. I also want to acknowledge electeds, but before I do that, for accessibility reasons, we do have interpretation services tonight. So before we really get started, we are providing translation in Spanish, Haitian Creole, and Cape Verdean Creole. So for you to access the interpretation services, go to the horizontal control bar at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, click on interpretations, and then you can click Spanish, Haitian Creole, or Cape Verdean Creole when you click on the language, and then you can hear and you'll have access directly to that room. So I want to acknowledge, before we hop into the next slide, I see Councilor Fernandez Anderson, who is the D7 counselor, in the chat. And I wanted to give her space to say hello and address the Roxbury community. Oh, I see her, but she might have hopped off. Okay. Well, Counselor, if you hop back on, wanted to give you a chance to say hello to Roxbury and go from there. Okay. So the next slide. So before we head into discussion and presentation from the city team and from the Boston Soccer Unity team, wanted to just underscore some main guidelines for our discussion today. First, we want to understand that everyone comes from a place of respect and that we're leading with respect as well. When we're giving comments, please use I statements. And if you are representing a community, please let us know in your comments and our questions when you're given an opportunity to speak. Also want to underscore, we are prioritizing Roxbury residents in this conversation. We will have other community conversations specifically on different neighborhoods, but this for tonight is prioritizing Roxbury residents for transportation. Also, please limit your comments or questions during the discussion portion to 2 minutes. We will have a timer that says 2 minutes, and I will also flag for anyone if they're getting towards that 2-minute mark. And also just be mindful of the space you take up. We want to make sure that everybody has opportunities to speak and give feedback on the proposal here tonight. Also, for the project teams, we'll be making sure to collect information, questions, concerns, the goal tonight is to make sure we're getting as much feedback as possible. We will be also answering all questions in the chat, and if we don't get to them, make sure that you can reach out to whitestadium@boston.gov, and we'll be making sure to get back to you all as soon as possible with questions that you may have. I hope I'm not hallucinating, but I seen Councilor Anderson in the chat say something. Is she able to unmute herself, or she, okay. Okay. Next slide.
Hello. Can anyone hear me?
Hi.
Is it possible to change my name to Angie, please?
Oh,
this
yeah,
is
change.
Angie. I wasn't given a different link. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for joining. Next slide. So just to go over the quick agenda today, I will be giving intros. Hello, everyone. Then I'll be passing it over to Anchi Moreno, who is a policy advisor in the mayor's office. then to our commissioner, Nick Gove, who is the transportation commissioner, then to Brian Beasley, who is representing Howard Hudson and is a consultant for the Boston Unity Soccer's team. And then during our Q&A portion, if there's questions that do come up, Morgan McDaniel, who is the deputy chief of operations, will chime in if necessary. Going over the agenda, we will have the overall project overview, then go specifically into transportation planning and how we're going to have the approach to that, and then talk a little bit about the proposed multimodal plan. And I think that's Brian who will lead on that, and then apply plan, and then really go into specific questions for you all so we can get feedback on transportation decisions that we will make as a team. Next slide. Okay. So this is a question for you all, and you could scan the URL and submit it with your phone. What transportation topics do you want to see covered today about transportation at White Stadium? So the way you answer this is you take if you're on a laptop, you take your phone, and then you'll scan the URL specifically and then be able to submit your comments, and we will take it all in and record what are the top concerns that you all feel about transportation specifically for Roxbury. I see a couple of people coming in, and I also see some participants typing. So I see biking routes, residential parking restrictions, pedestrian safety, parking, topics that we will, definitely cover tonight. So these are good. Parking along Walnut. Can I walk my dog? Parking and pedestrian transportation options, number and frequency of large shuttles. So thank you for submitting these. These are very thoughtful, and we'll be recording these as well. So I would give people opportunity to keep submitting. Free shuttles, question marks, accessibility. These are great. I see in the chat, parking on Zebra Street. So we'll definitely make sure to record all of these, and then during our discussion portion, we'll definitely circle back on a lot of these concerns, especially if they're not answered throughout the presentation. Okay, so a project overview, our purpose. And I think this is probably honestly one of our most important sections, because this grounds us in the why, and why is this important. So renovations historically have been proposed on White Stadium and Franklin Park for a long time. And although there has been many attempts, it has never been brought into full fruition. And it's important to address the history to really understand where we're at right now. There definitely is an appetite to see the space activated, to see the space renovated and invested in, but we know past plans has not succeeded because it really hasn't found the right combination of funding, support from the community, partnerships, and just public benefits that really center community residents. Sorry, something on my screen. So the benefits of having this type of partnership with the Boston Unity soccer team, a private public partnership, it's important because we're not able to just scratch the surface. We're really able to dive deep into investments for the community. We're able to have a sustainable partnership on maintenance, because we know when we have a big stadium or when we have a large facility, year over year maintenance is and can be expensive. And when you have a partnership that is able to offset and provide support there, that's great. There's also opportunity, particularly with this plan, for outdoor and indoor amenities, like a high quality field, track and field, also other athletic hubs. And we know specifically these are going to be really important for our young BPS students as well. We also know that this potential opportunity can create a pathway for opportunities for our communities to have jobs, and our local businesses to have a platform to uplift the work that they are doing, and also for MBEs and WMBEs as well. And also we know that there's a commitment on the Boston Unity's team to have a $500,000 community benefit investment into the community. So seeing that happen and come to fruition, and knowing and identifying the community has that the community will feel impact, and having that community benefit fund as a part of mitigation. Accelerating implementation of the Franklin Park Action Plan. We know that a key component of the plan is that Franklin Park needs to be activated and see deep investment. The amenities and operational plans created are going to allow the space to be more activated, and will also help support other large events like what's currently taking place either at the Playstead or at Franklin Park. There's definitely room and appetite for activation. Next slide. This right here is just a sample of what a future month could look like with White Stadium being renovated. You can see that BPS and the community will have access to a year-round, well-maintained, well-sustained, and well-kept stadium. Currently, BPS athletics programs will be expanded and we'll be able to add a lot more programming. And we know that when we add and invest in more programming for our young people, we're really investing to our future leaders and our current leaders, actually. Public access will also expand significantly in the evenings and weekends. The modern and versatile space, that'll be a year-round resource for all student athletes. And this does not include unscheduled times that visitors and local residents can just, come and use the facilities. Even on game days for women professional teams, we can have time that games are able to have. Even on the few game days for the Boston's for the women's professional team, we can time the game so we're able to use the stadium for events during the day, like cross-country meets, or in the morning if there's needed as well. So basically, if the game is like during the evening, we'll be able to use the stadium during the day to make sure that there's access to community members. And it's also really noteworthy to recognize the large community events that currently call Franklin Park home, and they'll be able to remain and benefit from the new amenities of the renovation. From that, I think the next slide will want to pass it over to Anshi to talk a little bit more about the transportation planning approach and think through how we're doing that, but passing over to Anshi.
Awesome. Thank you, Brianna. Hi, everyone. My name is Anshi Moreno. I'm on the Mayor's Office Policy Team. And I've also been a lifelong resident, so I'm happy to be here tonight. What Brianna established some of a foundation of the background for this project. So now that we're all on the same page and have a broad overview, I'm going to share our process for developing the transportation plan we're presenting today, and how we've tried to ensure it reflects what we've heard throughout the engagement process. We also want to thank you for the feedback you've provided during the past community meetings. We had transportation meetings in the fall, and since then we've also had a lot of support from Livable Streets and Franklin Park Coalition, and all of that, your feedback has helped us develop a transportation plan that we believe is comprehensive, accessible, and responsive. So thank you for your engagement. I see a few of you in the chat that have been with us throughout this process. What has been our approach? So we've heard about all the existing transportation challenges the community has faced. There are already many large events at Franklin Park, and we also know that it feels in Roxbury and in other surrounding communities that there's a lot going on at once. And these are great projects, but we know it can be overwhelming and a lot of information to process at once. So what this renovation project allows us to do is to take the opportunity to align internally on all the different projects going on so we can better communicate with you all, and to develop a transportation plan for game days that can serve as a blueprint for other large events and can then be customized for medium and small events that are hosted year-round at White Stadium. So since proposing the plan, BTD, Boston Transportation Department, and Howard Stein Hudson, who's the soccer partners consultant, have been collaborating to best answer the question you see here. So how do we best manage traffic for NWSL soccer game days to serve both residents and visitors, and improve transportation challenges for existing large events at White Stadium. So this is the question we've all been working towards refining. You saw a very preliminary transportation plan back in the fall, and we're now sharing on this screen at the bottom. You'll see all the different tools that tools and feedback that we've reviewed. So we have public feedback from transportation meetings in the fall that we reviewed. The Franklin Park Action Plan has great guidelines. We've also looked at city transportation initiatives in nearby areas, and I'm going to ask Maya and Xavier are from our BTD team and are working on these other projects. We're not talking about those in depth today, but they're going to share their contact information in the chat, and you can follow up with them about those community meetings. But we've talked to BTD about what else is going on in the neighborhood. Fourth, we looked at, we had an in-depth traffic management analysis that we'll share later on. Fifth, we reviewed what city tools we have to apply different parking regulations and other enforcement tools. And lastly, we reviewed what city and the Boston Unity team's new staff commitments we have. So, for example, there will be a new Franklin Park administrator, new maintenance staff that the mayor announced at State of the City, and Boston Unity is also hiring a community engagement director. So these are all a new staff that will help us make sure that this plan is comprehensive and that we can apply appropriately. So this was everything that we looked at to get to our plan. And then from there, we took that and created these transportation goals for game days at White Stadium. So I'm going to go through them, and I'd love for you to put in the chat if you think any are missing. 1, improve pedestrian safety, accessibility, and wayfinding at park entrances. 2, make it easy for neighborhood residents and park visitors to get around. 3, encourage use of sustainable transportation choices. 4, ensure efficient traffic management during large events. And 5, use new and existing tools to protect parking mobility in the surrounding neighborhoods, especially during big events. So please share in the chat if you think anything is missing here, but these are high-level goals here that guide the rest of the plan. Awesome. So in the meantime, as we said, there are many events held at White Stadium, from BAMS Fest to Kitty Carnival. We have Puerto Rican Festival up here, BPS graduations, cross country meets, so many more. And last year, for example, 15,000 people came to Franklin Park for BAMS Fest, which we love. It's a huge success. The stadium will have a 10,000 seat capacity. So again, one of the many advantages of this project is that we will now be able to create a transportation plan for all these different sized events. So I'm going to hand it off to Brian from Howard Stein Hudson. Again, he's the transportation consultant for the team, to share an updated transportation plan for game days.
Evening, everyone. Brian Bizel from Howard Stein Hudson. I'll go over in more detail the game day events, as Anshi just said. Next slide, please. So when we started talking about transportation, of course, there's the different modes on to get to the site. There's obviously public transportation, the Orange Line, the extensive bus lines in the area, and then even the Red Line with shuttle service from there. There's also, of course, people that want to drive and park, and of course, a big component of this plan is that there is no spectator parking on site. So anyone that wants to drive will have to park in a satellite parking lot and then take a shuttle to get to the site. There also is, of course, taxis and rideshare, and then biking and walking for people that are able. So all of these numbers that I'm giving you and that we'll discuss tonight in detail are based on an 11,000 spectator event, right? So full capacity. And we essentially assume that 40%, and this is all based on data from other sports entities in the city, and other similar entities from other cities in the country. We have 40% taking public transportation, 40% parking off-site and being driven in, 10% using rideshare, and then 5% using biking and walking both. Go ahead, next slide, please. So again, there's a lot of existing transportation options, especially public transportation options in the area. The orange line, again, the red line a little further away, but then an extensive bus network in the area that people can rely on to get to the stadium. The messaging about transportation from the moment someone goes on the website to buy a ticket will be that there is no parking on site, there is no parking in the area. You should be taking public transportation. You should be walking, you should be biking, and if you're not able to do that, then there is satellite parking, which we will get into more detail. But this graphic really shows how well served the area is with public transportation from the existing network, right? This has nothing that we're implementing. This is all in place already. Next slide, please. And then just to show how feasible it is to walk from the transportation, the existing transit. The Green Street station on the orange line is about a 0.7-mile walk. Many of the bus lines that were on the previous slide have bus stops right along the edge of Franklin Park, so very short walks. And then on the right here, if you look, this is Gillette Stadium with the New England Patriots down in Foxborough. And just to give a scale perspective of walking from Green Street and would people do that or not, many of the parking lots are the similar distance away from the entrances to Gillette Stadium. And in some cases, which we're not even showing on this slide, they're across Route 1, of course, which is, pretty daunting to cross and wouldn't really be possible without the traffic operations managers that they have out there during those events. So it's a long walk. It's not a nice walk, right? You're just walking through a sea of parking lots. It's a much different experience than walking from Green Street would be from here. But people do it, right? So it's the expectation of going to large events is just that if you're not getting dropped off right at the front door, right? So it might seem like a bit of a distance for some people, but it's something that people are already doing at other events. And similarly, Kenmore Square is not too much closer to Fenway Park than Green Street is to White Stadium as well. Next slide, please. So there's extensive pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure in the area. The city of Boston has this slide put together. We can get into more detail during the Q&A if people would like. But essentially, these are the safety surge streets and different elements that the BTD is putting into place. We wanted to group everything as public transportation. Now we're into pedestrian and cyclists. I am not an expert on this slide, but there are representatives from BTD here who would be able to talk about this more extensively. So next slide, please. And then within the site, right, there's obviously Franklin Park is a great place to be walking and biking. We'll be improving paths in the area. We'll, extending bike networks within the site. This graphic really shows a lot of the activity that could happen or that does and will happen in the park. And this is all non-vehicular with the exception of the magenta line on the upper left, which is the shuttle pickup and drop off from the North Loop, which we'll talk about. Also on the right here, I just want people to notice the Seaver Street and Humboldt Avenue area, which would be used, which we'll get into more discussion, but I just want to point that out so everyone could locate it. And then the two large blue rectangles near the site is where our bike parking and bike valet would be. And this will be both for private bike parking. If people come on their own bikes, they'll have a secure place to leave their bike and not have to chain it up all over the park. And then also, even if you take a blue bike, we'll have the valet system in operation, which instead of as soon as the one blue bike station dock, as soon as they're full and nobody else can then bike there, the valet service actually has blue bike attendants there that take the bikes out of the dock so that there's always a dock that's open and available for somebody else to come. And then vice versa, when everyone's leaving, the docks are used, people take a bike, and then as soon as the dock is emptied, the blue bike valet person puts a new bike in there and it's ready to go for somebody else to use it. So it really expands the amount of blue bike ability that we have in the area without, again, putting up, like, we don't want to have bikes parked all over, tied to trees. We also don't need blue bike stations all over Franklin Park. So this gives us that flexibility to provide a great service while not hindering the park for the non-event times. Next slide, please. So like I said, we would love for everyone to be taking public transportation and walking and biking, but we do realize that it's not feasible for 100% of the spectators to do that. So what we're looking at without parking anywhere on site or in the neighborhoods is setting up satellite parking facilities. that people would then take a shuttle to get to the stadium. And again, the messaging for this will start right from the get-go, right? That there's, if you want to drive, this is the places you have to go to, and you have to pre-purchase your parking tickets so that we'll know how many buses are needed and shuttles are needed to get people back and forth from these locations. And the messaging starting from the beginning will really set the biggest impact on people's perceptions of, maybe this isn't worth driving. Maybe it is better just to drive somewhere and take public transportation into the area. Next slide, please. And then now, as for the shuttles, this is a closer in view, right? They'll be coming from the different satellite parking areas. We'll also have shuttles from key T stations. So this one is showing Forest Hills on the lower left, and then also a connection to Fields Corner on the right side, and also showing some of those satellite parking routes that come in. So as for the number of shuttles, you can see, and it might be a little bit small to read, but coming in from the Blue Hill Avenue entrance, we're estimating that there'd be 49 shuttles before the event and after the event. And then from the Forest Hills and the Arbor Way entrance, there would be 26 shuttle trips. And it's important to remember that this is all over a 2-hour period, right? So it's basically coming in from the Arbor Way would be 13 shuttles an hour for a 2-hour period. Then the game lasts for 2 hours when there wouldn't be any activity. And then after the event, another 2-hour window of having 13 shuttles an hour coming and going. Next slide, please. This is similar. This is the routes to the north and to the west. And we'll be running a shuttle that will be very, we expect to be heavily used from Jackson Square. They will be coming down Columbus Avenue and getting into the site via Walnut Avenue and then back out the same way. This estimate as of now is 57 shuttles, and again, over 2 hours. So it's about 30 shuttles an hour, which is, one shuttle every 2 minutes. It's not this continuous flow of shuttles and it's all you see of buses and buses and buses, right? It's basically a shuttle or two coming and going at a time. And then also from here, you can see Stony Brook and Green Street also labeled, which again, I think most people, if they're taking the orange line, that 0.7 mile walk is not infeasible or unrealistic. So I think the majority of the people on public transportation will, and especially the orange line, will just be walking to the stadium from there. Next slide, please. So now you went by one, there you go. So now we're getting really close to the site, right? And how are we going to control, even if it is just shuttle buses and some of the Uber and Lyft activity, how are we going to control that traffic? So each of the yellow dots you see here are traffic operation managers that will be directing traffic. So we have one at Seaver Street and Walnut Ave and Columbus Ave, that intersection. Walnut Ave at School Street will have a lot of pedestrians coming and going from there. So that's really pedestrian safety, get them across the street, get the shuttles out of the area when they're leaving after dropping off. And then also somebody, making sure that only shuttles are using this pickup drop off, right? Because that's what it's intended for. And then likewise on the lower right, there'll be an attendant watching the Southern Loop area. And then also some parking ambassadors helping out, make sure that people aren't driving and parking in Franklin Park itself, right? There's some unregulated parking that's used by the zoo and the golf course and obviously just regular park users. And our intent is to not have those spaces used by our spectators, right? We're going to have, again, the messaging from the get-go, but then also more importantly, is enforcement of this and making sure that they're not coming into the park and parking. And as I discussed briefly before, on Seaver Street and Humboldt is where we would have the Uber, Lyft, and taxi drop off, and then also just private people dropping somebody off. This also will be managed. It'll be managed at the intersection with a traffic operations manager, but also within the pickup and drop off area with team ambassadors directing people where to go, helping them get in and out of their cars and making that operate smoothly. Next slide, please. So here is more detail then on that area. You can see on the left side, there's a modification that we're proposing to the existing turnaround, where right now there's a driveway to the north of the intersection and to the south of the intersection, and those only allow right turns in and right turns out. So what we're proposing is to modify the access so that there's one driveway, which you can see here actually results in less pavement than is out there now. You can kind of see on the right side there, the outline of the existing exit driveway. And this shows that there's, room for a lot of activity within the site so that it's not backing out onto Seaver Street. And then another important note is that, as I just said, not backing out onto Seaver Street, it's important to note that this is our operations plan and that this can be and will be modified as events happening, right? We're going to have a starting operations plan that's used the first game. We're going to see what's working, what's not working. We're going to fine tune it. We're going to make it better. And one of the ways to do that is with the variable message signs, right? We're going to be directing people for pickup and drop off to come to this lot. And if we need a different messaging, then we'll change the messaging. And if we need more messaging and more ambassadors, then that's what we'll do. But it'll be an ongoing process. But something, we have a very detailed plan in place, but it's certainly something that could be modified and improved as we go. That I will pass it off to Commissioner Gove for the discussion on the on-street parking.
Hi, good evening. My name's Nick Doves. I'm the Deputy Chief for Transportation, also serving as BTD Commissioner. I want to take a few moments and talk about how we're proposing to preserve neighborhood parking and mobility. So BTD is planning to create a neighborhood-specific game day parking program for residents and their visitors on streets within the identified White Stadium walk area. These plans will be tailored to the needs for each respective neighborhood. The program will allow residents with a Roxbury resident permit parking sticker on their vehicle to park on the streets where parking is prohibited on game days. We're not proposing to expand RPP restrictions on the areas in the walk area that you've seen, but people will be eligible to apply for an RPP permit so that they can park on the street on game days. Additionally, we're proposing a new program that will allow visitors to obtain a parking placard or potentially a hang tag that will be available to residents regardless of vehicle ownership, so long as they live on a street in the White Stadium walk area. We'll limit those to one per household, and we'll do an annual issue on that, likely changing colors, numbers, that type of thing, so we can, kind of manage that program. Next slide, please. So here you see the walk area. It's the shaded orange area where we're proposing to protect parking for residents and visitors. Again, this is based on the radius we expect visitors would be willing to park and then walk to the stadium. We really want your feedback on this area. And we'll jump to the next slide, which is going to show kind of a street by street breakdown. So these are the streets in the walk shed. We really, really want your feedback on this, and we'll jump to the next slide where folks will have the opportunity to give us that feedback in the survey.
Okay, folks, so you'll see on your screen, I'm going to go back so you can see the map. And please share in the chat if there are streets that you're not sure are on this, but we've shared the walk area, so we want to make sure we got it right. So again, the way to do this is to scan the QR code up here, or to go to slido.com and enter this phone number. Can someone from the team actually input the number that you input? Do it right now. Here we go, everyone. Thank you. So I'm going to go back just so y'all can see it.
And I just want to note, this is Morgan McDaniel. In the chat, somebody mentioned that if we're expecting people to walk, 0.7 miles, then we should be restricting parking to that same distance. We agree with you. That's completely logical. And that is why we've chosen the walk area that we've chosen. It's the distance we think people would be willing to walk to be able to get to the stadium. So we don't want people to be parking in that area and walking.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to see. I see Walnut here. All right, we will this slide. The poll will stay open, so feel free. We will post the slides up, but we'd love your feedback and to make sure that these are the right streets here.
Great. So now we're going to talk about kind of the enforcement measures that we're going to use to make this work. So first and foremost, we're proposing to create a new event fee violation. This would be a $100 fine for parking violations on game days in designated areas around White Stadium. We have a similar violation fee for around Fenway Park. We would install tow zone, no stopping on game days signs, again, exempting residents with Roxbury resident permit stickers, as well as the visitor placards or hang tag program. These would be in effect for 4 hours before and 1 hour after games. The visual you see on the right side is the sample sign that we currently use in and around BC for Boston College football games. We plan to bring in a dedicated BTD parking enforcement shift specifically for the White Stadium walk area, and that will be supplemented with towing enforcement if necessary. Next slide, please. And again, as mentioned before, soccer game attendees will not be allowed to park in the Franklin Park lots. They are going to be encouraged strongly not to do that, and we're not going to allow that. We're committed to retaining parking for key park destinations such as the zoo, golf course, Shattuck picnic area, the tennis courts. Within the park rangers and BPD officers will enforce parking restrictions with support from game day traffic ambassadors, as mentioned earlier. All park visitors can access free Boston Uni soccer shuttles from the MBTA stations on game days. And again, we'll continue to work closely with the Franklin Park stakeholders, such as the zoo and golf course, to craft an operational plan specific to the parking areas that they've historically used.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. So we're almost at the Q&A. Thank you for all your questions in the chat. We really appreciate it. We're trying to do our best to get through them here. But before we head into that, we just want to share two local residents here and how they may experience a game day on a Sunday. So here we have Veronica, who's an older, seasoned, and wiser local resident, and we have Rachel, who's a younger local resident. So we want to pressure test what we just talked about. So these are two residents that are actually not going to the game, but live in the area. So here we have Veronica, who lives on Seaver Street in the Franklin Park Apartments. At 10 a.m., she notices that there are display game day parking passes on cars parked on Seaver Street. As Commissioner Gove just shared, those will be for residents and visitors on game days. So other days of the season, you'll have regular parking. And there should be no noticeable event-related impacts. Then around 6 p.m., she wants to go to Stop and Shop at Grove Hall. And again, the game had started at 6 p.m., so keep that in mind. So she will notice that there's traffic detail at Humboldt Ave and some traffic on Seaver Street and Blue Hill Ave, as we see today. And then at 7 p.m., she's left the grocery store and she's headed home back to Seaver Street. So she'll notice some traffic on Seaver Street and Blue Hill Ave, and will have her game day parking pass so she can park there. Next, let's look at another resident. Rachel is 16 years old. She lives in Walnut Park in Roxbury. Around 2 p.m., she decides that she wants to walk her brother to El Parquecito playground. Since the game is at 6 p.m., there might be a BPS meet or a running group using the stadium, but around this time, she won't notice event-related impacts. And then at 8 p.m., the game has already been underway for 2 hours. She wants to walk her dog in Franklin Park. She will notice safety ambassadors at School Street and Walnut Ave, and will notice that fans are beginning to leave the stadium. So we've shared a multimodal plan here. I'm going to pass it off to Brianna to guide us through the Q&A.
Thank you, Anchi, and thank you to Commissioner Gove and Brian for giving top lines of our transportation approach. So we'll talk about next steps, and then we'll talk about the engagement schedule, and then we'll go specifically into questions that we have for the community here. So all the feedback that we're going to hear on from the later discussion, and I'm going to try to go through these quickly because I know the priority here is to hear from community. So we'll first incorporate all the feedback that we hear tonight. We will then use the feedback from today's conversation, as well as, you know, a lot of the conversations the team is having, but also the JP and Dorchester neighborhood transportation meetings tomorrow, incorporate that all into our plan, and then present it to the IAG on May 15th. The Boston Unity soccer team will, when ready when ready and having all the community feedback, have a final plan presented to the BPA board. Then the Boston Transportation Department, BTD, will then codify the Transportation Action Plan agreement with the Boston Unity team. And then this is an operational plan that will continue to evolve and to be refined because feedback is needed at any given time and to understand the actual impacts of decisions. And this work will also give us a blueprint for any other large event. And I seen some of that in the chat of like what happens with other large events that could happen at the stadium outside of the games. And then on a related but separate track, BPS, the transportation team, is working on a plan specifically for BPS students because we know that a lot of their games and a lot of their meets and stuff will happen at the stadium. Next slide. So this is some upcoming engagement. We're happy to share this. Happy to share this after, but as I mentioned, tomorrow, Dorchester and Jamaica Plain will be having specific transportation conversations, like the one we're having tonight with Roxbury residents. Then there'll be upcoming design workshops and many meetings, and we'll have more refined conversations about specific design. And then we have an IAG meeting to address design and transportation on May 15th, and then also the community benefits that I mentioned earlier on Wednesday, June 5th. Next slide. Okay, so now we are at the discussion conversation. As I mentioned earlier, we have some team members that will be answering some of the chats when we can, and answering some of the questions in the chat when we can. But we wanted to create this space to have a specific conversation about actual traffic and parking impacts. So for each question, we'll have an allotted time, and we'll also be timing responses. So we're going to keep each response to 2 minutes. So we can go into the first round of topic of questions. So game day parking regulation. So the specific question is, are we proposing the right streets to restrict to residents only when we're talking about the abutting streets around the White Stadium and Franklin Park? Does the proposed structure meet your needs? So those are the specific questions that we wanted to discuss on game day parking regulations. So if you want to voice your concerns or questions, you can raise your hand to answer these 2 questions about game day parking regulations.
I'll add to this. I've seen it in the chat a few times. We'd love to hear how many guest passes or how to best administer those.
I see Nefertiti. Can ask you to unmute.
How are you? I'm sorry, I can't. I'm at a children's thing, so I can't really show my background, but I guess my question is I could not see which streets really close up, which streets are actually going to provide residential parking for, because as part of Garrison Charter, we've been asking for this for a very long time. And you guys, the city has been really kind of like not working with the community. So I guess I'm just concerned that because this white space project is impacting the community, now residential parking is now back on the table. So I guess I'm wondering, obviously, looking in terms of exactly which street you're talking about and why now.
So I'll definitely pass it over to either Brian or Commissioner to talk about that. I do think there's a clarification piece that maybe BTD can give on like resident permit parking in this specialized program that we're trying to implement or potentially could implement. So I wanted to pass it over to probably Nick, maybe.
Sure, thanks, Brianna. Yeah, we are not proposing to restart expansion of RPP at this time. What we're proposing here is to allow residents to that may not have an RPP sticker now to apply for one, and that sticker would allow them to park on the street on game days when those restrictions are in place.
And I just want to add, I'm sharing my screen, which is a dynamic map of the area that we're proposing that is within that sort of walking area to the stadium. So I can zoom in and zoom out if folks have questions about specific areas or streets.
Thank you, Morgan. That map is very helpful. And thank you, Commissioner. Yes, just to clarify, it's a specialized program specifically for game day conversations. So to that as well, just to reiterate, any other questions regarding game day parking regulations? Is there specific, if also is there specific streets in Nefertiti that you have concerns about and you want to just let us know so we can make sure they're like to notify if they're in the catchment, or if not, please put that in the chat or let us know as well.
And
That's-
Chief Moore, I see in the chat, 7
Oh.
miles takes you from Green Street down Washington, over Townsend Street, over to Warren Street, over to Blue Hill, back to Columbus, and down to American Legion. Maybe Brian can talk about, where are we versus that proposal?
Yeah, so sorry, I'm not following Morgan compared to what proposal?
Yeah, so if you look in the chat, there's a comment that
Yeah.
is talking about a specific, from Lewis, that's talking about a specific area. So Green Street to Washington.
Yeah, so sorry. So basically, I had to answer this in the chat, but basically, as you can see, Lamartine to the west and Jamaica Plain, MLK Boulevard to the north, and then Warren Street to the east. And this is our proposal. It was based on a walk area from entrances to the park, which is why it's not a perfect radius, right? There's different entrances, so that it kind of got this bubble shape to it. But that's what we're hoping to hear from everyone now, right? Is this big enough? Is it not? Is it too big? Not big enough? We can modify this as we hear. But this was what we thought made sense. And another comment that was in the chat was that, if we're saying people are going to walk from Stony Brook and from Green Street, well, then people are obviously going to park and walk, and we agree, right? So that's where we got these distances to start from as the radius. But happy to hear if people think we need to expand it or not.
Yeah, and I'm zooming in so you can see that this is Townsend, which is within the area. So we are proposing game day parking restrictions there. So people who live on this street, we're proposing, you would get your sticker and your placard. You and your guest would be able to park on the street. People who are not residents would not be able to park on that street on game days. So we are proposing an area that's larger than Lewis, what you're suggesting, in terms of going up to MLK Boulevard. But if you think it should go all the way, let me see. Yep. So then we're proposing to Warren Street, and then I'm following this down to Blue Hill Ave. So I think, Lewis, we're on the same page.
Thank you for underscoring that. And we could look for it in the future, maybe listing the street names, although there's a lot of them. Before I pass it over to Vesper Barnes, I seen a question in the chat. Is there a fee for the sticker placards from Lynette?
There is no fee for RPP stickers at this time, and there's no plan to create one for the visitor placard program either.
Thank you. Passing over to Vesper Barnes, you can unmute yourself.
Good evening. My name is Vesper Gibbs Barnes, and I'm a member of the Berea Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is directly across the street from the back of White Stadium. We have permission from the city of Boston to use the parking lot on Seaver Street on Saturdays and at other times as the church need be and needs are. And based on your this discussion, we have members that come in from all over Boston, Randolph, Milton, just members that come in on Saturday morning to worship. And we're concerned that we will not be able to come in and park for that purpose on the game days. And I think there are 20 of them proposed at this time. And we'd just like that to be factored in. Because we wouldn't mostly qualify for resident stickers or visitors pass. I don't know. I don't know what is being considered as far as that's concerned, if it's that's being factored in, or if folks are thinking about that for the first time as I'm raising it. And Lewis is telling one that I was a former president of the Franklin Park Coalition. That's correct.
Oh, nice. Thank you for raising your question, and thank you for your leadership, especially working with the Franklin Park Coalition. So the team actually has a planned meeting with that particular church and to plan on the impacts for Seaver Street overall. So we're looking with our faith-based liaison, Will Dickerson, and I believe Chief Irish also reached out. So we're looking to have more intentional conversations on how it would impact the church and the services, and if there's any special events that's happens and stuff like that. So we look forward to having more like intentional conversations with your church. And if you want to take contact information as well, that would be helpful.
Yeah, certainly more communications needed to discuss this, but there is room to do both, right? So you're certainly not getting kicked out. Let's just put it that way. There's ways to manage so that you can park when there's an event and not have issues. And again, where a lot of the games are going to be on weekends, but they could be and most likely will be later in the evening. So starting at 5 or 6. So the church activity might have come and gone before we even need to use it. So, but there could be times when it overlaps, and we need to figure out those details for sure.
Yeah, but we're to Brian's point, we're definitely willing to work with the congregation and make sure, and mapping out what the needs are there, for sure.
I'll also add here that you mentioned when your services are, scheduling priorities are something that we're still working through. So that's something that we will keep in mind, and that will help us make sure that we're prioritizing community needs and events. So that's something that we haven't finalized yet. We know there will be at most 20 games. It depends on how well the team does that season. So that's something to keep in mind as we work through this.
Okay, I'll pass it over to Barry Lawton. You can unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, I'm unmuting myself. Thanks everybody for participating. Appreciate the opportunity. I just had a question. I think it's specifically for the transportation commissioner. There are huge disparities in resident parking availability across the city. 28,000 permits in South Boston, over 20,000 in Brighton. Do you see any infringement on this project potentially on those areas that don't have residential parking? And what is the accommodation for a large part of this walking area to cover Blue Hill Avenue, Columbia Road, American Legion Highway, and subsequent parking areas around there? Because there's access to Franklin Park, not just from Roxbury, but also from Dorchester. So if there are any provisions, and this sounds great to have residential parking on one day, but it sounds even better to have residential parking permanently for these people. And most people are coming home during the evening, to stay there. And these are around the time that the games are there.
Thank you for your question, Barry. So we do have a specific Dorchester meeting tomorrow on transportation, tonight specifically on Roxbury and understanding the implications that a game day might have on Roxbury neighborhoods and streets. I don't know if that fully answered your question, but wanted to
I can help too. So right, so the map that we see here is more oriented to the west into Jamaica Plain and the north into Roxbury and not the east. And that's just because of the walk distance that there is through Franklin Park, right? So basically after you've crossed Blue Hill Avenue, you walk past the zoo to get to the stadium. That is a large chunk of what would be considered the walk area. But like Brianna just said, we're meeting with Dorchester tomorrow, same meeting, presentation we're doing now. And if they see this and say, we want more protection, then that's something that will be discussed then. But basically this was derived, purely from walking distance, to and from the stadium itself. So it's a little skewed to the north and west just because that's where the stadium is located within Franklin Park.
Okay, thank you for your response.
Thank you, Barry, for your question. Any other questions on the specific topic of game day parking regulations? Before we move on, does any of the team members have anything to add specifically on game day? And we could shift to the three other topics.
Yeah, Brianna, if I can add, I think we saw some questions in the chat about the sort of stickers and guest passes. Will there be, if you have multiple cars, can you have multiple stickers? What if you want to have multiple guests? So I think we'd love to hear from folks if you have comments on about what your needs are and what would work for you, so we can take that into account as we tailor this new program.
Even hearing the process on like how to receive the different placards, like all of that type of detail will be helpful to hear feedback on.
Also want to uplift in the chat, there's a question of, will there be a mechanism in place for annual or some sort of other cadence of review for this plan? I think it'd be great to touch on right now. Brian or Morgan?
I mean, I can answer that, actually. Hi. We are certainly going to have resources in place, senior executive positions that are not just going to review parking and traffic more than annually, but, every aspect of our tenancy there in White Stadium. So, this is community engagement that we are doing right now in planning, but we are going to continue to do this through our use of the stadium. So absolutely, there will be continued review, both for parking, transportation, and security and cleanup, and all the ways that this project is going to impact neighbors around the park.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. And I was reading the comment when you jumped in, but yeah, I mean, certainly not annually, right? For transportation, this is going to be, especially in the beginning, game by game, right? We're going to see what works the first game, what doesn't work, we're going to alter it. We're going to see, if that addresses the problems or not, and we'll alter it. And we're going to keep fine tuning it as needed until we get it right, so that it's running as efficiently as possible.
Thank you for that. Being able to have that flexibility and pivot when we learn new information is going to be important for something like this. So thank you, Brian. So I actually do see some questions specifically about shuttles in the chat. So I'm going to save that. So until we hit the shuttle section, but I see Senator Wilkerson and then Louis Elisa after. So I want to give you guys the space to provide comments or questions to the game day parking regulation section.
On me first,
Yes,
Brianna? Good evening, everybody. I'm Diane Wilkerson, and I just want to, just by way of background, I actually am currently living, in Harvard Commons. Actually, I'm around the corner from Shattuck. My family house, some many know, is on Denison Street, next door to Dr. McGuire. Actually, we just got here, left there. So in Roxbury, probably 1,000 feet from the site when crossing Columbus Ave. So at the Trotter School, Brianna, I don't even know if I remembered seeing you there, but this is my concern. I actually am one of those people who ask a list of questions about game day parking at the Trotter School. And we had a disruption shortly after, so not one of my questions was answered. And I asked questions about the plan, which I'm hearing again tonight. So tonight I'm listening, and the same plan that we asked questions about and pointed out problems at the Trotter School gets presented to us again, like those questions were never heard. And it is extremely a frustrating doesn't even really express it, but can I just, and I'll list them. They took notes and I know what they are. When do you get the questions answered? If you don't get them answered after or even in between would save you guys so much of this, because I would have appreciated a follow-up even after the meeting and I wouldn't be asking these. But here's a few things that I do want to put on the table again. If to do what I hear you saying, you're going to have to do checkpoints to make sure that you're letting the golfers in, you're letting the people who going to the zoo in, that you're letting people who just come to the park to walk every day or walk their dogs in. So there would be checkpoints all over the place. That's number one. Second, I asked that night, I am not aware of any policy in the city that has the city imposing restrictive parking in a neighborhood that didn't ask for it. I know that neighborhoods, there's a process. You have to get so many people on the street to sign, to get the approval process. And it's a cumbersome one and it's a high bar, and it should be, because the presence of the stickered parking changes lives. We have a very transit driving population. Our kids, they're driving Ubers, they're taking Lyfts, they're renting Turos, so they're not going to have a sticker this week and the following week. But more importantly, no one asked. And one of the reasons they didn't is because there's almost like a dozen senior buildings. The families come to visit them on the weekend. So how those things are due to that? I knew you were going to do this. I already
I'm going to chime in.
Right. Just how do
No,
I get in here?
So I
am
a million
tomorrow.
percent, I a million percent agree. We definitely should get you answers to specific questions. I believe they were taken by Counselor Anderson's team, so maybe they should
No,
be.
they were not at the Trotter School. They were not. This team took notes and said, and then I never got an answer, right? And it's not for her to answer. I want the transportation department to answer me.
So we
Because
could
I have questions about it. So
we could definitely follow up and get those answers, specifically about checkpoints, I believe was one of the things that came up. The process on the community asking for specialized restrictions on parking, stuff like that. And I think the goal of tonight is to have a lot of the specific conversations from with folks and get their thoughts and ideas on specific parking restrictions as well. So I definitely think we could formally get responses for the specific questions that you have as well. If there's any specific answers now, we could probably provide that as well.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah. I think Brian, you just muted yourself.
I did somehow. I don't know what I touched. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the checkpoint. So I certainly wouldn't want to refer to it as a checkpoint, right? It's not going to be somebody not letting you onto Circuit Drive to get into the park, but there will be parking attendants or parking ambassadors near the parking areas. So you're not going to be blocked from nobody's going to be blocked from getting into the park, but we are trying to figure out the best way of protecting the parking for its intended users, right? Which are the zoo, the golf course, and just park users that are here to enjoy the park. We are working with the zoo and others, the Parks Commission, the Parks Department, excuse me, to try to figure out the best way to do that. But it's not going to be police details and security not allowing people into the park. It's going to be off to the side where the parking facilities are to make sure that they're managed properly and keeping the spectators out of those areas so that they are free for the rest of the park users.
Thank you, Brian. And just, I apologize, my team just let me know they do have the questions and the answers will be given by Friday to you, Senator. So we'll have those specific questions in writing as well. The team's already on it and is collaborating with Counselor Anderson's team, so thank you. Louis?
Thank you for the opportunity. And as you all know, a lot of the questions have been asked before, but some of them still outstanding. One is that the circulation map needs to go all the way over to Columbia Road, taking in Grove Hall and Columbia and Washington Street, which has a parking lot there that services the large population, but is often open. Same thing with the mall that's on the corner of Blue Hill Avenue in Geneva, and that's interestingly important because it does affect a lot of people and it's within walking distance. The circulation map is critical because you've not said how circulation is going to work within the park. For the large buses dropping people off, they're not going to be able to exit, I think, very easily, even though we looked at some opportunities, out to Walnut or Sigourney Street. Once again, Sigourney is probably off limits because of the size, and Green Street will not handle the large buses. So we have to talk about circulation, and it's not just the big events like the Puerto Rican and Dominican and the Caribbean festivals and BAM, but communities use that park on a regular basis. Children are there, so I'd like to know specifically what the circulation pattern is going to be. Same thing about Walnut Avenue and the Walnut Avenue turnaround and how that's going to be accommodated. Any physical changes made to Cedar Street makes it more difficult for people to get across that street, so any proposed changes needs to be vetted through the community. The other piece is that you've not said anything significant about protecting the senior housing that's on the corner of Walnut in Columbus and what's going to happen with them going back and forth doing game days. The other piece is really important. On non-game days, when they propose to do activities and events, how will the parking operate and what's going on? And finally, I have 30 seconds. We haven't heard nothing from the Boston Public Schools yet, and that really complicates this whole discussion. We have no idea what they are doing. We have some proposals they made, but I have not seen anything structured that says that they're going to be good partners in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis.
Sorry.
Yeah,
are we able to bring up the presentation that has this two slides that show the circulation routes of the shuttles? I went over them quickly. We've presented them before, but would be good to stay on.
Can you pull those up? Just to give context, we're shifting to the next topic of shuttle routes then, and also wanted to do like a 18-minute time check for 7:30. And also, Louis, although tonight is on transportation specifically, we can definitely make sure to be mindful of the BPS piece as well. But I see Anchi going back.
Keep going. Yep, so we can stop on this one. So either one, this one's fine. We can start here. So this is the Columbia Road one, Louis, that you were saying, going up Columbia Road and into Dorchester and past Geneva. You can see the color coding, which I didn't go over, but if you see a blue line here, that means it's a route to and from where we expect satellite parking to be. And then the red lines are routes to and from public transportation. So in this case, on the right to Fields Corner, and then hopefully at Four Corners, Geneva if the Fairmont line becomes not the commuter rail, but the Indigo line with better service, then that would certainly be something that would be great to connect to. And then when those routes overlap, it becomes purple, right? So blue for one, red for the other, and then purple when it's together. So they would come in on Circuit Drive from Blue Hill Ave. And then from Forest Hills, and again, parking to the west, you can see the blue lines in the lower left. They'd come in to Circuit Drive from the Arbor Way, and then there is a parking area that is behind, near the golf course and the gates. I forget the name of the gates. You were talking when we walked through the site there, the historic gates. So there's a little parking facility there that would be able to accommodate this number of shuttles that we have coming in over the 2 hours. So that is the route there. We've done engineering plans of this, similar to the Uber and Lyft drop off, where you can see the cars turning around in the actual vehicle paths. We've done the same thing for shuttles to make sure that that activity would fit there, and it does. And then if you go to the next slide, it switches to the north loop. So again, blue for commuter, for the satellite parking, and red for the Jackson Square, which is really just turning around within Jackson Square. And then the purple route for where those buses would go. They would come in from Walnut Ave on the existing driveway that's there to the west of the stadium. And then they would do a counterclockwise loop and exit back onto Walnut Ave. Excuse me, right near School Street, which right now is only a pedestrian entrance. So we will have to modify that to allow for the vehicles to be able to exit there. And of course, that would only be open during large events when the shuttles are running. It wouldn't be a new vehicle entrance. And same thing, we have engineering plans of that show, how we'd modify it. I think that, I don't know if they're in this deck, but we do have them, and they have we starting to go over how that would work, separating the pedestrians to keep them away from the buses while everyone's coming through that Walnut at School Street intersection.
Thank you.
So Ani, to answer your question, it wouldn't, and it's a very good point. It's not a new road. There is an existing the loop, the Placedead Road that loops around the north side and west side of the stadium is 30 feet wide. This is an existing pavement route that's not open to travel right now except for maintenance vehicles. So we would be using that 30-foot wide path to get the pickup and drop off, which is the white circle with the red dot around it right next to the stadium on this graphic. And then likewise going out towards Walnut Ave, again, is an existing pathway that we would basically bifurcate and make into two sections, the right sides being for pedestrians and the left side being for the shuttles exiting. But we don't need to add any pavement to have this happen. That's very important to the Parks Department, that we're not creating more impervious surface. So this is all within existing, I hesitate to call them roadways, right? Because they're not open to vehicles, but they're roads that are in the Franklin Park already. And then, yeah, Luis, sorry, I didn't mention that either. There are places, which Luis knows because we toured this the area with him. If you get dropped off at the Uber and Lyft drop off at Humboldt and Seaver, or even the South Loop, as we call it, which is the Circuit Drive parking area, there's some paths within Franklin Park that aren't ADA compliant because of the slopes, right? They're more than 5%, and that's just because of the topography of the area. So we are going to provide golf cart shuttles for ADA people. This way, when they get dropped off on the edges of the area, they have a way to get to the stadium that is ADA compliant. And again, that was done because we're trying not to disturb. We try to not disturb as much of the park as possible, right? So we don't want to start leveling out pathways that are following the natural contours that are there already. So that seemed like the better option than going in and really starting to modify pathways that aren't ADA compliant right now.
Okay. Thank you, Brian, for that in-depth shuttle route walkthrough. I do see a couple in the chat. Questions in the chat, but now we're shifting to the topic in the topic of shuttle routes. So if there's any more questions on that, I did see why not send the Jackson Square shuttle to Humboldt. I think you answered that.
No, well, I was just actually typing that. So that would just be too much activity to focus in one area, right? So we have the pickup and drop off there. If we also started shutting the shuttles there, it would just be too much concentrated in one location.
Sounds good. Okay. Is there any more questions specifically on shuttle routes? And team, if I'm missing any in the chat, just let me know as well. Okay, so I don't see any hands or new.
Sorry, Brianna, I see a question that I think relates to pedestrian safety and shuttle routes. So Annie's question is, filling the park with shuttles every 2 minutes for 2 hours before and after the game day seems fairly unwelcoming and dangerous for pedestrians and children using the playground. Brian, can you talk about, details protecting the playground, what that shuttle frequency actually looks like, things like that?
Yeah, so I mean, she's about right with the 2 minutes for the 2 hours before and after. Right. So we were saying it's going to be 30 shuttles coming in that way per hour off of Walnut Ave. Again, the playground is to the west of the School Street intersection where we would be, and there is the existing path that we'd be staying on. There's actually between the playground and the path is a bunch of heritage trees that we are not allowed to impact, and quite honestly don't want to impact. So there's other vulnerable entities or things between us and the playground. So we're not getting any closer to the playground than we already exist. And honestly, with the traffic operations manager, directing traffic as at that intersection, it would be safer to cross Walnut Ave during those times than it is now when it's just a crosswalk that doesn't have any protection.
I see a question from Jacob. We're in the pedestrian and bike safety segment.
Yes, so this is related to both pedestrian bike safety and the shuttles. I mean, I think that sending these shuttles through the park where the School Street Walnut Ave entrance, that's kind of the main entrance to White Stadium, the main pedestrian and bike entrance, and where you want people to be entering right at the top of School Street. So if there's a way, rather than bringing the shuttles into the park, there's a way to have them drop at the bus stop there by the library, or find some creative way to do that. Have them turn around through that intersection, or drop there and then have them turn around at Humboldt or something like that. I think it'd be a vastly superior plan than changing the feel of pedestrians and bikers who are entering the park, because you really want people to be walking into the park through that entrance and have that experience of walking into the park and seeing the stadium and being able to relax because they're not looking over their shoulder at a shuttle.
Thank you for that feedback, Jacob. I think maybe there could be like a overlapping map of all the entry points and the bike entries and the shuttle routes as well. Maybe that would be helpful as well. But thing to be mindful of when we're thinking about that. Brian, did you have any comment to that, or you?
No, I mean, like I said, there is an engineering plan that seemed like it was too much detail for this presentation, and to show up properly on the slide. I mean, but it is a wide path that's there now, and like I said, with all the people directing traffic and the ambassadors, right? There's a way to keep the pedestrians and bike users, whether they're going to the soccer game or just going to the park, because it is a main entrance from the west to get in. There is a way to do it and manage it properly, so that the buses, they're kind of, if you look at the loop and if you're there, they'll kind of be next to you, and there is no crossing point other than when you're right on Walnut Ave at School Street. And again, we'll have people directing traffic there to make that operate better than it does when there isn't anything going on.
Okay. Thank you, Jacob, for your question. I see a couple questions in the chat that are like, well, shuttle. I do want to do a 7-minute time check, but I will list a couple questions we have on shuttles and or pedestrian safety. So there's a question on how big the buses are. There's some comments on how we can be thoughtful about turnarounds of the shuttles, and that's kind of like environmental impacts of the shuttles. Yeah, I think that's the ones I've seen. If the team sees anything else, let me know. But do you know size of the buses and stuff like that?
Yeah, so the size, I'm going through them too. Sorry.
Yeah.
Size of the buses they're coach shuttles, right? And the point of that is using the large shuttles is so that we have more people per shuttle, so that there's less overall shuttles in general, right? If we use smaller vehicles, then there'd be a lot more vehicles. I'm going to start there. There will be people directing traffic at the pickup drop off on Humboldt for sure. Like I said, there'll be one where there'll be people doing it on Seaver Street in the intersection, and then there'll also be people within the pickup drop off area itself, making sure that it's operating efficiently. Someone's asking about an updated transportation study. There is no plan to update the study. We're responding to comments that we've received, but the study itself had all the volumes in there that were necessary. And since we haven't changed the number of spectators, the study is still accurate. We have not talked to the DCR about using the Arborway Parkway, but that part of the Arborway is actually between Forest Hills and Circuit Drive is actually not protected. There's already city buses running on that part, and the zoo runs a shuttle on that part of the Arborway. We would need to potentially talk to DCR if we were using other parkways or other parts of the Arborway that do have large vehicle restrictions on it to see if we would need permits. But again, until we know exactly where the satellite parking is going to be, those discussions are premature because we don't know what routes we would need to get approval to use. Next one, buses stored during the game will be in the parking areas where we're showing the pickup and drop off operation. So the south loop off of Circuit Drive, and then also the north loop near the stadium. During the game, some people will be looking to leave early. So we do need to provide a way to get them to away from the stadium if they're leaving before the end of the game.
Brian, I'm just going to chime in here because I know we have one more section and wanted to
Sure.
time for a wrap up. But thank you for your thoroughness because I think it's been very helpful to provide context for the folks on the call. I wanted to give space specifically because I don't know if this fully came up. It definitely was talked about in our presentation. But if anyone had questions on specifically our rideshare, and should we consider any other measures to direct rideshare, whether that means rideshare stops, specific signage or anything like that, on any recommendations specifically there on rideshare usage for using White Stadium.
And Brianna, while people are formulating their questions on that topic, just want to quickly address a question that we received in the chat. Like, will there be a number that somebody can call if the plan is not going as intended? I think we are working on building out sort of a governance structure by which, we will have very clear pathways for people in the neighborhoods giving feedback to Boston Unity, to the city of Boston, as we very much approach this as an iterative plan. We're doing our best to come up with our best, most thorough effort, but we know that things are going to have to change, they're going to have to improve, and it's going to be a group effort to get us there.
Can't agree enough, Morgan. They're definitely, like we mentioned earlier, specifically about the game day parking. There is opportunity for pivot when we learn more and new information. So I know we're approaching the end. Is there any last minute questions or flags or concerns? We'll also be saving the chat to make sure that we are, taking in every information and all considering all feedback and impacts. We also will follow up with the questions that were requested at the last meeting. The team has those, so we will make sure they go to who requested them. So thank you for highlighting that. I want to, I believe Anchi is controlling the slides. I do want to go to at least next steps if there's anyone else want to give a second for people to raise their hands if they have any last minutes. Okay. So I wanted to go back to next steps because it's really important that we underscore that this is an ongoing conversation. Tonight was specifically about the transportation impacts on Roxbury, and want to be intentional about how we're really trying to get like street by street, door by door, and how this proposal will impact the daily life of residents. So also took notes about connecting with the church from that Vesper brought up, and also making sure that we're, working closely with the senior housing in the neighborhood. So we are looking and actively doing those type of communications and one-on-one conversations, as well as conversations like this, to make sure we get it right, and making sure that we have space to pivot if we hear feedback. So again, we'll be incorporating all feedback into the plan that we hear from either one-on-one conversations, directly going to constituents, or conversations like this as well. There is a May 15th IAG meeting. I see some IAG members on the call. Boston Unity Sports soccer team will definitely obviously present and hearing a lot of the feedback from the community. Will input a final plan when necessary, and when they feel like have a collective understanding of the project and the community needs. Then BTD will then codify the transportation access plan with the soccer team. Then this will allow an operation plan that will continue to evolve, as we spoke about earlier, to think about elements of the plan that need to evolve when in actuality. And also wanted to provide two things. This is also a blueprint if there's any other larger events besides Gay Day events that are held at the stadium. And I know someone mentioned, what does the partnership with BPS look like? BPS transportation team is working on a plan specifically for students and for BPS community to make sure they feel accommodated, supported, and heavily involved. And just to also center us in our why, this is for our young people, this is for our BPS students and our families and our BPS community as well. So I want to thank everyone for joining tonight. Again, this is recorded, so we have all the comments, questions, and chat questions, and all the feedback. So thank you all for participating, and have a good night. And any other follow-up questions, please email whitestadium@boston.gov. Thank you all. Good night.